Hi, I'm Barbara Rumkunis, and this is your Exeter History Minute, coming at you with some food history. When Exeter's Board of Trade held its annual dinner in 1896, the menu included not one but two oyster dishes. Today, oysters are seen as something of a luxury food that most of us only eat at fancy occasions. But centuries ago, oysters were a cheap and very common part of our diet. Oysters were harvested and eaten by the indigenous people in the Piscataqua region long before the English arrived. Dried and stored, oysters could be enjoyed throughout the year. Huge heaps of oyster shells can be found just along shorelines in this region. Clam and mussel shells were used to make wampum, an exchange medium, but oyster shells were of little value, and they were usually just chucked in a pile. Englishmen, particularly those from London, were well acquainted with the European varieties of oysters. The Thames estuary was rich with oysters, so much so that today a London mass transit pass is called an oyster card in a similar fashion to Boston's Charlie card. In Exeter, Charles Folsom opened his oyster house in 1860. The local paper said, "His store quickly became an institution of Exeter where friends nightly gathered, and many have been the interesting discussions held there." George Levitt opened Levitt's Oyster House in 1875, which promised to serve oysters in every style. What does every style mean? Oysters can be eaten raw. Unlike other seafood, they can be shipped by packing them into old flour barrels. If you lived close to the sea, like in Exeter, you could send one of the kids down to the fishmonger, and they'd bring home oysters, sometimes already shucked, in one of these wax-lined cardboard oyster pails. You'll be forgiven if you thought these were invented for Chinese food. They were for oysters. The Exeter Cookbook, published in 1889 by the ladies of the First Baptist Church, contained 13 recipes for oysters, whereas the lowly clam had only 4. Offerings included oyster fritters, baked oysters in the shells, fried oysters, oyster omelets, creamed oysters, and 3 separate ways of preparing escalloped oysters. Oysters were also listed as mere ingredients in other recipes, particularly in roast turkey or chicken stuffing. One thing we didn't see, oyster chowder. There was oyster soup, oyster stew, no oyster chowder. Oysters could be purchased fresh, canned, or pickled. By the late 1920s, however, oysters were losing their appeal. Many of the large oyster beds in New York and even here in Great Bay were thinning. Suspicions arose that oysters harbored diseases like cholera and typhoid fever, which was not entirely unfounded. Fewer oysters and a more skeptical public brought the bivalves to where they are today, an infrequent part of the menu. This doesn't mean we've seen the last of oysters. They're something of a hero in the ecology of our estuaries. Oysters provide natural filtration to water overburdened with nitrogen. The Nature Conservancy and the University of New Hampshire have been working to increase the oyster beds in Great Bay. While we may not go back to eating oysters several times a week as we did a century ago, we may be reaping the ecological benefits of the little mollusks for a long time to come. For more Exeter history, check out our website at www.exeterhistory.org.
By the sea, by the sea, by the beautiful sea, you and I, oh how happy we'll be.